Do you know what Islam is?
Prophet Zakariyah's story is a lesson to us that no matter how difficult or how impossible a situation seems, one should never lose hope in Allah. For Allah, nothing is impossible. And when Allah gives, He gives without measure. And even though Zakariyah prayed for it, he could hardly believe it when his prayer was answered. We should always be patient in every situation. Here is the story. Centuries passed after the death of Sulayman as, and the Muslim kingdom rose and fell. The temple of Sulayman has disappeared over the generations, and in its vicinity, the modern-day Bayt al-Maqdis was erected. The final group of prophets and messengers descended from Ishaq as, Zakariyah as, Yahya as, and Isa as are interlinked, both by blood relationship and by the proximity in time and location. To fully understand the connection between these prophets, it is best to read all of their stories together. During this time, Bani Israel had reverted to their characteristics of stirring mischief amongst each other, and more seriously, they also started initiating blasphemy against Allah SWT. They claimed that Allah was stingy, Astaghfirullah al-Adzim, and that Allah withheld from them. These claims are the direct opposite of Allah's attributes of generosity. After all that Allah had given to them throughout the generations, this was how they displayed their thanks and gratitude towards Allah. These constant accusations provoked the anger of Allah upon them. Their claims of stinginess are even contained in current Jewish and Christian scriptures. The original scriptures revealed to Musa as and Dud as had been manipulated to such an extent that they now assert that when Allah had completed the creation of the earth, He was too tired to rule the earth. This is why the Old Testament, which was originally based on the Torah and Zabur, but has been manipulated and falsified by Bani Israel, claim that after the final day of creation, God took a rest, again, being total blasphemy as it depicted Allah as being incompetent instead of omnipotent. Additionally, the Jews claimed that Allah had granted authority to the Jewish scholars to rule the earth, and to issue rulings which would supersede and override the teachings of Musa as. Bani Israel had elevated itself to be the chosen people of Allah above other races, in direct contradiction of the teachings of racial equality in Islam. Such was their immense arrogance that they claimed to know more than Allah, but there is nothing new in this pattern of behavior. This is why, generation after generation, prophets and messengers were sent to Bani Israel to lead them of the right path, but within time, they would deviate until yet another prophet was sent down to their community to guide them afresh. Yet, repeatedly, Bani Israel disobeyed from the smallest things to the largest issues, continuously rejecting the messages, signs, and commands of Allah. In the last era of the prophets descended from Ishaq as, their behavior worsened and they even resorted to murdering the messengers and prophets. The guardianship of Maryam as. During this time, there lived amongst Bani Israel a man by the name of Imran. He was so renowned for his piety that his was considered to be one of the best of the families of all time. He was not a prophet or messenger, but his household was so noble and elevated in Allah's kingdom that there is even an entire chapter in the Quran named after it. Imran had a pious wife, and her sister was married to Zakariyah as, a prophet. The Quran does not provide accounts of Zakariyah's as childhood or youth. Hence, the story of Zakariyah as begins in his late adulthood, when he was elderly. He was a prophet and messenger of Bani Israel. He is a direct descendant of Dud as and Sulayman as, and his activities were centered in Bayt al-Maqdis, where the temple of Sulayman as once stood. It is confirmed by authentic hadith that Zakariyah as was a carpenter. He led a simple life, and like majority of his brothers in prophethood, was of limited financial means. Although he lived an austere life, Zakariyah as was constantly in a state of gratitude to Allah, and was intensely humble in his demeanor. Similar to his distant ancestor, Ibrahim as, he and his wife had already reached an extreme old age without having any children. Meanwhile, the wife of Imran, his sister-in-law, or his wife's sister, gave birth to Maryam as, and she pledged to dedicate Maryam as towards pure servitude to Allah. Shortly after the birth of Maryam as, or in some accounts, before she was born, her father, Imran, passed away. This sparked off a dispute within Bani Israel on her guardianship. Zakariyah as should have been the obvious choice. He was her uncle by marriage, and moreover, was a prophet whose moral character and piety were beyond question. No one else had his merit of character. But true to their argumentative nature, Bani Israel disputed this choice, for they wanted the prestige of raising Imran's daughter. Zakariyah as kept silent and maintained his good manner. The people eventually agreed that they should cast lots to decide the matter. All the candidates wrote down their names on pens, or wooden writing instruments, and put them in a container. A child was sent to pick one of the pens at random. The pen that was selected bore Zakariyah's name. Dissatisfied at the outcome, some of them asked for the cast to be repeated. This time, the claimants put all their pens in the river. The pen that would swim against the current would win the guardianship. Again, it was the pen of Zakariyah that won. Still stubborn and quarrelsome, they demanded a third round. This time, they decided that whichever pen swam with the current would win the cast.
Again, it was the pen of Zakariyah that won. Still stubborn and quarrelsome, they demanded a third round. This time, they decided that whichever pen swam with the current would win the cast. Yet again, it was only Zakariyah's pen that differed from the rest, swimming with the current while the other pens drifted upstream. Observe the power of Allah. People may plot and plan, but what is written will take place. And you were not with them when they cast their pens as to which of them should be responsible for Maryam. Nor were you with them when they disputed. Al-Quran 3:44. Thus Bani Israel had no choice but to acknowledge that Zakariyah was the undisputed champion and was entitled to assume the guardianship of Maryam. A sincere supplication. Maryam grew up as a righteous woman. From her childhood, she was in a state of prayer, positioned in seclusion away from the people in an enclosure within Beit al-Maqdis specially built for her. Every time Zakariyah, as her guardian, checked on her, he always found her surrounded by an abundance of food. This was not the food that he brought for her, so how did it find its way into a private sanctuary? More strangely, the fruits did not belong to the climate and were out of season but still fresh. He asked her where it was from, and she replied that it was from Allah. Every time Zakariyah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with her provision. He said,
"O Maryam, from where is this coming to you?" She said, "It is from Allah." Indeed, Allah provides for whom He wills without account. Al-Quran 3:37. Witnessing these miracles repeatedly only reaffirmed Zakariyah's faith in Allah, in particular faith that everything was in the hands of Allah, no matter how impossible the conditions. Like his ancestor Ibrahim, he had always yearned for a child to continue the legacy of prophethood, but his wife was unable to bear children. He did not want children to inherit his wealth, of which he had none, but rather, progeny who would continue spreading the message and knowledge of Islam. Encouraged by the miracles he witnessed, and also being in the proximity of such a blessed place and the pure soul of Maryam, he prayed with utmost conviction to Allah. "My Lord, grant me from yourself a good offspring. Indeed, you are the hearer of supplication." Al-Quran 3:38. He also supplicated, "O my Lord, leave me not single, childless, though you are the best of the inheritors." Al-Quran 21:89. "My Lord, indeed my bones have grown feeble, and gray hair has spread on my head, and I have never been unblessed in my invocation to you, O my Lord. And verily, I fear my relatives after me, since my wife is barren. So give me from yourself an heir, who shall inherit me, and inherit, also, the posterity of Yaqub. And make him, my Lord, one with whom you are well pleased." Al-Quran 19:4, 19:6. Before long, Allah responded to his prayer, confirming that his wife's barrenness had been cured and that they were to have a son who would also become a prophet. Moreover, this son had the honor of being named by Allah himself, with a name that had never existed in mankind's history. So we answered his call, and we bestowed upon him Yahya, John, and cured his wife, to bear a child, for him. Verily, they used to hasten on to do good deeds, and they used to call on us with hope and fear, and used to humble themselves before us. Al-Quran 21:90. So the angels called him while he was standing in prayer in the chamber. Indeed, Allah gives you good tidings of Yahya, John, confirming a word from Allah, meaning, the word of Isaac later on, and, who will be, honorable, abstaining, from women, and a prophet from among the righteous. Al-Quran 3:39. Nevertheless, Zakariyah was astounded by the news. He burst out, "My Lord, how will I have a boy when I have reached old age and my wife is barren?" The angel said, "Such is Allah, He does what He wills." Al-Quran 3:40. This reaction is reminiscent of the earlier reaction given by his distant ancestor, Ibrahim when it was announced to him that he was to have a son. It was not a statement of disbelief, but rather an exclamation of surprise. Zakariyah continued. "My Lord, make for me a sign." He said, "Your sign is that you will not be able to speak to the people for 3 days except by gesture. And remember your Lord much and exalt him with praise in the evening and the morning." Al-Quran 3:41. True to Allah's promise, his wife soon delivered a son, and he was named Yahya John the Baptist. We will set out his story in another chapter, insha'Allah. The death of Zakariyah. As mentioned earlier, the stories of Zakariyah Yahya and Isa are interconnected. Hence, the death of Yahya and Zakariyah happened in close sequence to each other. Yahya was brutally murdered, and the mode of his murder was a beheading, with his decapitated head presented to the king. We shall provide more detail when we talk about his life, insha'Allah. Imagine the heartbreak that Zakariyah must have felt. Yahya was born at such a late age in his father's life, against all the odds. He led a life that was exemplary and fulfilled all of Zakariyah's supplications. He was the ideal son, for not only was he an exceptionally devoted servant to Allah, but he was also kind and generous to his parents. Whether one is a prophet or not, it is a terrible thing for a parent to endure the death of his or her child. To find that one's child, who is innocent of all sin and wrongdoing, has been senselessly and violently slain, must have made the grief almost unbearable. However, the crisis deepened. According to reports, emboldened by the murder of Yahya Bani Israel decided to turn against his father too. A mob, bent on hatred and destruction, set out to kill Zakariyah. Such was their arrogance and disbelief that they were willing to murder their own prophets. According to the Jewish traditions, and since there is nothing in Muslim reports which contradict this, which means we are neither to accept nor deny, Zakariyah managed to flee. With Allah's will, a tree opened up its trunk and allowed Zakariyah to hide inside it, and then wrapped him up in its depths. However, Shaitan pulled a fragment of Zakariyah's clothes through the cracks, thus exposing him. According to some reports, the pursuers initially wanted to set the tree on fire, but then decided instead to saw the tree in half, along with Zakariyah in it. This was how his life abruptly ended, in the most brutal and bloodthirsty way, and by the evil hands of the very people he was trying to guide.
Do you know what Islam is? It's a way of life for all. It is taught in the Quran.